Welcome to the Regenaissance Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Griggs. Visit www.theregenaissance.co to learn more. Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Griggs. I'm the host of the Regenaissance Podcast. And today, alongside me, I have Matthew of Little Way Farm and Homestead. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me here. I'm excited.
So I've been following you for a little bit on Twitter, and it's been really cool to see. I mean, this is what's just great about social media as a whole is now you can get the inside scoop of a farm or a ranch or farm and homestead. And so just seeing how you've been building it all has been really cool. So I guess my first question, what's the backstory? Did you grow up in agriculture, or what led you to doing a farm and homestead?
Yeah. No, it's a good question. It's a fun topic too. So neither my wife and I grew up in agriculture at all. So I think many people would consider us then first generation, or that's a label that we hear being thrown around a little bit more often now. I did grow up across the street from a conventional farm, as I understand it, or as I recall it, but didn't really have any involvement in it. Wasn't interested in it. Didn't really know anything about it. A few years when my wife and I first got married, though, we did have an interest in land and in growing things, growing plants, etc. I grew up. My father was always very interested in landscaping and always kept like a really neat, orderly, household around the household. Mulching and gardening and things like that. So I suspect that rubbed off on us a little bit. But there was some period where my wife's health really kind of took a turn, and we had to start asking certain questions about what was going on. And this took us down a long conversation, a long pathway of understanding women's health and the nutrients available in our food and what was important in our food and how our food was made and created. And then, when you go down that pathway, there's certain things that you can't unlearn anymore. You start learning about what's happening or what could be happening inside processing facilities. You start learning about how animals digest food and which foods are most appropriate for certain animals, and how we can manipulate certain diets in certain animals to get certain outcomes in the meat. And when you go down that pathway, you kind of start to question, well, is everybody, along the whole pathway really being honest and transparent? What's the goal? Is it to maximize profits? Is it to create good tasting food? Is it to create healthy food? And so when my wife and I first got married, we were welcomed into a few different experiences with some families that we didn't really know were, quote, homesteading or farming. That wasn't really phrasing that was necessarily familiar to us at the time. But I have these really strong memories. One in particular, I was invited to a family's house on the outskirts of Cincinnati at the time, and they were going to process chickens. And I'm not sure I knew what that meant, really. I mean, I did know what it meant, but like, I didn't know exactly what we were going to do. And, we go out there, and the road names start to change to things like, animal names as you're leaving the city of Cincinnati. And it's kind of funny. And you realize like, oh, we're definitely getting out here into the country a little bit. And we pull in this driveway, and they invite us into, and they're processing chickens, and we're out there catching Cornish cross chickens in the middle of the field. I've never touched a chicken in my life. I don't know what they smell like. I don't know if their wings are going to hurt me if they flap them. I don't know any of this stuff. And so we're out there silly running around catching chickens. And ultimately, we were invited into this process. We go through the whole thing. We catch chickens, we, process them, we learn how to eviscerate them. I like to comment, it was a 12-year-old young girl who taught me how to eviscerate a chicken. It was very humiliating, very humbling. And but really good. And you learn these things, and then you can't unlearn them, because now you see how your meat goes from, a living animal to dinner. And I remember, in conjunction with that experience, we went home, because we were kind of in this in this middle ground. At this point, my wife was sourcing a lot of meat from farms, or using like farm to table sources. In Cincinnati, there's a source that like will bring us food from other farms, which is really neat. And we were becoming more accustomed to cooking with real ingredients and supporting farms and not whatnot. But I remember my wife had 2 jars of bone broth sitting on the table, and I have a picture of it, I think, somewhere still. And one was from, the carcasses of chickens and bones that we had gotten from either the store or someone else locally. And then the other was from this farm that we had, or this homestead that we had just worked with. And the difference in the way they looked was so striking that I had to look at them and think, okay, something is different about these chickens. One was very transparent, the other was almost you couldn't see through it. And you've got different nutrients, collagen buildup, fat, etc., involved in this. And so at that point, through that first experience, it's pretty much like, okay, well, we can't deny what we're seeing. Like, this is an anecdotal experience, but this food tastes different. We feel different. It looks different. It smells different. Everything about it is different. So then, is this better? Is it just aesthetics? I mean, what is this? But what we couldn't deny is that we ultimately felt better. My wife she feels better. She's more well. I feel better. I'm more well, and these experiences just continued to grow. We started getting farm fresh eggs, etc.
Before,
And
hold on, before you
yeah,
you go on too, I wanted to just uh, completely agree on the processing chickens too, because that's funny. That was the very first experience for me. Um, I was a vegan too, and so I went from being a vegan for 2.5 years, and then figuring out my life and all that jazz through that journey, and then it was a year later I started on this road trip, and I visited Josh Rayner Gold on Twitter on the farm or the ranch he was working on, and that it was processing day for that as well. There was like 20 people, and like you're saying, I've as soon as I got there, I was running around grabbing chickens and seeing that whole process, seeing the ranch owner do like a ceremonial process for each chicken to essentially think for its life, and then because I got to help out with that, in exchange, I got a free bird, and then this was on the outskirts of Denver, and so I went and had a we grilled that with a couple friends, and I remember having that meal with my friends and just hearing them rave about it too. Very true. And so that's just crazy that you said that, because I relate so heavily to that. Because I remember too just eating that thinking there's no looking back at all. The fact that I've never had this in grocery stores, because I, like most Americans, a lot of my diet was chicken, and it was just insane how much better it tasted.
it is. And I don't know if this is how it was for you too, but then you kind of realize, like, at the end of the day, that chicken is getting on your plate. It goes one of two directions, or really a few directions. And it's either starting in a giant feed, confined animal, a CAFO operation basically, or it's being started on pasture or somewhere in between. But something along the way causes it to taste, smell, the texture is that, like, everything is different. And then I wonder, is the nutrient density and the nutrient availability in that chicken different too? And I think we're starting to see evidence out there that suggests that there is variation. And this is it's very important things, not only from a skill set, a generational skill set, like, do you have the ability to procure meat for yourself? This is the same thing. People sometimes they'll reach out to us and say, like, how do I start seeds? Well, to many people, they think that's obvious. You put it in the ground. I said this to my daughter the other day. She's 7 years old. She's like, "Well, you put the seed in the dirt." I said, "I understand that you know that, and I'm glad you know that. That's what we're doing out here." But that and procuring of meat is our skill sets that people don't have, and they're intimidated by. So when we have this first encounter, where we're processing chicken, I've never seen a chicken go from alive to the table. Like, I couldn't even visualize what this looks like. How does this become a chicken breast? And that seems silly because people are going to be like, okay, well, that's obvious. It's the breast of the chicken. But it's really difficult if you've never been around animals or agriculture or hunting or any of these things to understand how it goes from walking, living, breathing to I am now able to eat this, and it's nourishing and it tastes good, and it's not gonna kill me, right? I'm not gonna get sick from eating this too. So it was a monumental experience for us. I'm sure it was, probably similarly, it sounds like.
Oh, very much so. I mean, I will always remember that day.
It's good. But it just, I mean, honestly, it continued from there. It was, we were lived in, when we first got married, we lived in a small house in the middle of the city, and we had these garden boxes that I planted, and we grew more food in those 4 garden boxes than we ultimately ate. And then we moved a lot in the city. We moved around the city a lot, and we had these experiences. We were meeting other families that were homesteading on the outskirts or in parts of the city, and our gardening just got bigger and bigger and bigger. We were before we moved to where we are now, which is now we're in Southeast Indiana, where we're fully farming and fully homesteading now. But before we did that, we were growing at our last house, I think it was like a third of an acre, maybe less than that. And we just had this little backyard spot, and we were growing tomatoes and watermelons and all kind. We were growing corn in the middle of the city, And it was interesting because we were in this cul-de-sac, and it spurned this entire conversation amongst the neighbors. And the neighbors started growing more
Hmm.
plants. And it was amazing because it was fun and people were interested and they're wanting to talk. And, you've got all kinds of produce and it tastes so much better. And it's just right there available in your backyard. And it gives you something productive to do at the end of the day. You go outside, you tend to your garden. So I'm also, I'm a big advocate that you don't have to wait to get to your acreage to start homesteading
I
or
see.
farming or anything.
Yeah, I love that so much because that's actually a funny timing. Literally yesterday, I was making a post on the Victory Gardens and how I really hope that. I mean, it'd be really cool to see like RFK and Trump and them to do some type of initiative for Victory Gardens because I mean, 40% of all of our produce is grown in these gardens, and like you were saying, that leads to conversations like that. Um, that's really freaking cool. I'm curious then with that though, like have you talked to any of them since then, now that you're doing your own farming and homesteading?
Not as much. I believe a lot of them actually ended up moving away. And I think it was because often it was because of the conversations that we ended up having there. I mean, we were not shy about what our intentions were. So that last place where we lived, it was effectively, we were in the intent. We had the intention of buying land and moving out and starting a homestead and beginning farming, and we couldn't find it, or it wasn't affordable, or it just wasn't happening. And so we basically settled on a spot in Cincinnati, and I think that those conversations, like we created really good relationships and friendships, and people saw it. But the last we heard, everybody had left, which was really interesting because I think a lot of them moved out to places where they either had land or had more space or could actually kind of exact on more of these ideas as well. Because I think it touches at things that people want to do, like they want to see their labor generate real things. They want to plant seeds and they want to eat they want the fruit. They It's undeniable. I mean, you've probably had a tomato that's been grown on a farm or grown in a homestead, a really small level. You can't deny that it tastes better
Hmm.
and it just looks better. And so I think these are really easy things that people can grasp. My suspicion is most people are so busy in life and they're so distracted, not on their not because, they're necessarily doing something wrong. It's just the way that society works, that you then take a tomato off a vine and have them eat it right from their backyard, and all of a sudden it kind of shocks them back into reality, that flavorless, watery, like almost pale colored thing that was on the salad that they ate from their wherever at work is not really normal. It's bottom tier quality. And as people, we can have better, and it's not hard. So like the Victory Garden thing, I think is an amazing idea. I think Victory Gardens kind of serves two purposes. One is that it immediately shelters people from logistical and supply chain issues. Like if the truck doesn't make it to the grocery store, you still have a garden full of food. And if you planted strategically the right things, you might have a lot of calories in that garden. Like if you plant a lot of potatoes and sweet potatoes, yams, things like that too. But the other thing is it gives families and small communities a degree of resiliency that helps them recognize their agency and keep them like top of mind. Like if I'm going to go into work, it's because I'm going to work for a reason, not because I am beholden to the system. So I think the Victory Garden is really neat because it really helps to communicate, like in these communities around the country, you don't have to give up all of your responsibility. You don't have to give up all of your agency. You can take care of your communities there. And I think that would be a really cool campaign or a campaign policy.
Yeah, no, for sure.
That was a long way from figuring out how we got to the farm and homestead, but
No, that's it. Yeah, yeah. I was trying to see if I had anything else to add, but I don't. So like, we can go back to just. So you were learning more, and I guess what made you jump from? Because you said you had your intention set already whenever you were in the city, and so I'm assuming you always had in mind then, with as you were growing that your garden and moving around, were you talking with your wife about getting a farm,
oh
or how
yeah.
how to lead that to that?
Well, I think a lot of it was, I was interested. There's some social media personalities. I became familiar with market gardening, and there's a I can't. His name is slipping my mind right now. He wrote the Market Gardener. I'll have to go back and find his name. But anyway, I was very inspired by him. He's up in Canada. And then we have, a few other names that were particularly important to me who are doing a lot of like in city backyard, like market gardening. And it just kind of grows from there. You become introduced to folks like Salatin and Greg Judy and, these other folks who are, doing these really good things on a bigger level. But it's not just that they're doing things, it's kind of the messaging or the intention behind it, whether regenerative ag or healthy food or just because it's a good way of living. And it was drawing to us and we felt good, and we have a huge, a faith component behind it all, and it all just works so well to understand, stewarding the land. And so then we end up in Southeast Indiana. Actually, after we had basically given up, we kind of resolved, like, this was 2021, 2022. There was a point where interest rates were literally skyrocket, like day after day after day after day after day. And I had been out actually just right down the road, maybe 5 minutes down the road, with a realtor in the area looking at raw land. So we had gotten to the point where my wife and I, we were saying, look, we'll just, maybe we'll find somewhere where there's, a camper or a modular home on it and it's got utilities, and we'll live in it for a while and build a house. Or, maybe if it's just there and it's unlivable, at least the utilities are there or something. Well, then you come out here and you realize utilities are not exactly, we're a little far out there. We've got water. um, but we basically gave up and we said, look, it's not happening right now. And then, as I don't remember this is the way my wife says it, but then we got a phone call from the agent, and he was basically like, look, man, there's two houses out here. Do you want to come see them? They're side by side. It's brothers. You can go in both of them and check them out. And I was like, yeah, I'll be there. And so we drive like an hour and 15 minutes out to find them. I walk in the first one. Cool. Not as interested. Walk in the second one. It's livable. Nothing's falling down. What's the acreage look like? It's a mix, 26 acres, mixed woods, mixed open pasture, barn structure on it. Sold. Like, what's he want? We have to make it. Like, we'll make it happen. And now we're here. And
Hell yeah.
everything since has grown. We came in the house and we basically gutted a lot of the house, ripped everything out, put new floor. We're still working on the house. Still isn't finished. And the farm and everything that people see online about the farm, and hosting field trips here and putting in, multiple 1,000 square foot gardens and, fixing up acreage. I mean, this place was in a lot of disarray when we got here, and it's become one of the most fun adventures seeing this farm grow and being a part of it.
I'm curious then. So you got the land and you got there. How did you go about just game planning on what all you have to do? Because I mean, it's a massive undertaking with just starting a farm, but especially with depending upon the state that's in whenever you bought it. So, like you're saying, it's in a lot of disarray. How do you strategize leading up to starting your farm and homestead?
Truthfully, we did it wrong. And in ways that I would, people reach out to us now and they're like, how, what do I do? This is the land. This is the acreage. This is what I want to do. What do you recommend? And we did do things the hard way. So we did things based on passion and excitement, not based on strategy or reason. So for instance, when we moved here, we have the perimeter of the farm is fenced. So, if you just take that at face value, you're like, okay, this is great. The animals are fenced, so we can put animals out here. They're not going to escape. Until you realize that when you're talking that much acreage, and that's not an enormous amount of acreage, but when you're going to throw, sheep and goats and pigs and cattle out there, well, those fences have to be suited for those animals. So we didn't do that, right? Like, there's trees down in certain areas. Cattle and sheep need different styles of fencing. Sheep are much less respecting of fence than cattle are, but cattle have certain, there's certain things you have to pay attention to and address. So ultimately, we've caused a lot of headache for ourselves and a lot of extra work. What we did is we just basically, we had an idea that we were going to make the farm and the homestead. So we're going to start farming. And a lot of this was just, things that we couldn't plan. It just were things that happened. So we installed 3 4,000 square foot gardens with a BCS tractor, which is a walk behind tractor. Jean Martin Fortier, that's who it was, because he's a big proponent of the BCS. He does the BCS tractor thing. Now it came back to me from the Market Gardener. So we put in those. We grew some garlic. We started trying to like push on the, hey, we're growing this farm. We've got broilers out here. We're growing them. People are buying them. We started making some connections. Someone ended up approaching us or connecting us with someone who was interested in buying garlic. And we had just planted some garlic for our family. Well, they came through and were like, well, we'll be a wholesale buyer and we'll just take everything you've got. And so that was how the garlic business started. So it just kept going from there. So we got wholesale and now direct to market. But we had an intention at the beginning that was a little different than I think a lot of people think. We had, because it's farm and homestead, it's farm because we intentionally produce for other people, and we're working to give jobs to local community as well as help small scale farms start up around the country. But it's homestead because we're the first customer, and one of our bigger focuses is actually on teaching people how to homestead. It's like if you ever come to me and you buy chicken from us, and then you say, "Hey, look, I don't need to buy chicken anymore because we're growing our own." That's great. That's fine. I'm thankful for you. How can I help you with that? So it's two angles there. So we did kind of a dual. We did this interesting thing which we don't hear people do a lot. We bought breeding stock for almost every animal that we have, and we bought regional specific animals for particular purposes. So, for instance, we have breeding stock for Berkshire pigs. We have breeding stock for Icelandic sheep. We have breeding stock for Nigerian dwarf goats. We're replacing and redoing our herd. We produce rose veal, grass finished rose veal, and we're actually fixing the herd or replenishing it so that we have breeding stock and breed specific for this region. And so we went through and made sure that at the very least, we have two things here. One, the homestead for our personal selves is secure because we can always produce more meat because we can have all the breeding stock. Our customers will never have to worry about whether or not we can get like feeder pigs, as an example, because we produce the feeder pigs here. Same thing, we produce the lambs. We will produce the calves. But we also made sure that those animals were regional specific, that they would thrive here with minimal intervention, which I think is something that people don't always consider because they're very interested in the look or something they saw online, and maybe they're thinking, well, I'm going to make money off of these animals. Well, the way you saw someone make profit off those animals was in Texas, and I'm in Indiana, so we have two very different situations here. And that's why we went with the breeds that we ultimately have gone with, because they thrive where we're at, or they can, with minimal intervention. So if there was any strategy, it was that one, we wanted to control breeding stock, and two, we wanted to make sure that we could basically be self-sufficient with minimal inputs from a farm and a homestead perspective, that both of those would serve our customers and also help teach other people how to do the same thing too. Because there's a lot of really cool looking animals out there. Like there's a lot of cool ways you can do things, but then there's where you are and the variables of your geography and your growing climate and all of those different things that make those animals maybe they're a candidate for where you're at or completely not appropriate for where you should be. So if there was any strategy, that was it. Fencing was not good though.
I'm curious then, do you have a story to share of just something that went wrong during that time?
I have a lot of stories to share about things that went wrong. I mean, even just very recently, so here's a good example. We had we right now we purchased a herd of Angus Simmental cattle. They were in the area, actually, that many of them were already on the farm here. And so we purchased them. We had one of them give twins in the last birthing, and I didn't notice the twin. It was in November of 2023. I couldn't even find it. I had a neighbor driving down the road, and he called us. We were celebrating Thanksgiving at a family's house out of state, in Cincinnati. So we're in Indiana, so we could drive up back. And he's like, "Hey, there's a calf out there." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And I came home and I went and I called him back and said, "Hey, I can't find a calf. There's no calf out there." He goes, "I'm telling you, there is a calf out there. I heard it bawling out in the field." Well, I was out in the field and I didn't hear anything. So I guess, we'll go back again. And ultimately he was right. I did find a calf that was off away from the herd, which was really odd because if cattle, you can't really just go in there and grab a calf. Like that would cause a serious problem. And they just let me basically pick up this calf, extract him out of the field. I put him in my truck, took him home, had to bottle feed him to keep him alive. And what I found is that when you take animals like that with genetics like that and you bottle feed them like that, and then you attempt to reintroduce them to a herd afterwards, it doesn't always work well. It might, but not always. So in this instance, it created a calf who was not socially accustomed to the herd, did not work well with them, always stood off from the herd. So you'd follow the herd, but not. And one thing that it for whatever reason did is it didn't allow him to recognize, and I suspect it's through a lack of social conditioning through the herd. It never allowed him to appreciate or begin to respect fencing at all. And I don't mean loose fencing. I mean any fencing. Tightly bound barbed wire, he'll walk right through it. It doesn't look comfortable, but he'll do it.
Yeah.
So I got a call once from a neighbor. It was pitch black. I mean, dark at night. And there's a radio tower not too far down the road from us. And he called me. He said, "Hey, Matthew. Hey, we're just coming home." I mean, pitch black. Like I'm going to bed. He said, "Hey, just in the headlights, I got or something like that." He's like, "We saw a calf out at the radio tower. Just want to let you know." So you got to think. There's no streetlights where we live. It's at nighttime. It is pitch black outside. So a black cow in the dark night, and I got to get him across the road. And I go out there, and sure enough, it's him. So, out of the fencing, off the farm, on someone else's farm, across the road. Somehow I got to get him across the road and not get him, myself, or someone else hurt driving. That's just one such example. I mean, I've had, free range chickens that we didn't fence off correctly that went to a neighbor's house, and doing what chickens do, they scratch through mulch and destroy landscaping. My sheep I have found, I went out one morning and I actually had to call local emergency because I was like, hey, when I say local emergency, again, we're very rural, so it's not like no one's coming. I just kind of wanted, if anybody called in, I wanted them to know, hey, it's my sheep. But I went out, I'm like, I cannot find my sheep. Where are the sheep out here? I cannot find the flock. And I go and I'm calling them because they come to you on call too. And they were not here. And I don't even remember if I knew where they came back from, but they came back. They were eventually.
That's wild. How long for the cow? How long did it take to move them and get back to your farm?
Not long. We were able to walk him back. It's more just like a logistical thing of,
Yeah.
there's a road out in front of, it's actually a state highway out in front of our farm. So the speed limit is supposed to be 45, but 45 and, at night is a little bit different. So you can see really far, from, like, we had a vantage point, like you can see really far, like, is a car even close to coming? Like, how many minutes will we have? And it's just a matter of like making sure that he actually goes across that road and doesn't run along the road or something like that. So in that instance, thankfully, they know where home is. Like, they have a sense of it. So he went right back. You kind of have to spook him in that instance a little because he's not grain fed either. So they don't respond to grain. He doesn't respond to a bucket. Um, I know some people are probably, they'll be, they won't like when I say like talk about bottle fed animals. It's just when you work with animals in a farm perspective and you're really working to manage like herds and flocks, it becomes a sociological issue, not a psychological issue. So if you're dealing with a one-off animal, the idea is, how do I get it back to the herd? Like, how do I get it back? That's where its safety net is. But when I have a bottle fed animal that doesn't really associate with the herd, now I'm working with a one-off animal. So everything is unpredictable. So, I mean, we follow, that animal is going to processing. I mean, it's not a good animal to have in the herd because it doesn't work with the goals of the farm,
Yeah.
which includes keeping animals and people safe.
Hmm. So I guess with all that then, and especially with the chicken and kind of going back to our conversation before this podcast, like before we hit record, on just the taste of chicken and all of that. So whenever you're getting the chicken too, well, I guess this could just be for all your animals too. How would you go about just the quality and care of them with the feed and what has been the strategy around all of that of actually taking care of the animals?
Yeah. So from a feeding perspective, all of our animals, if they're ruminants, are grass fed, grass finished, if they are designed for human consumption. We do offer like treats of, whatever we can, whether it's like molasses or a little bit of grain or alfalfa to breeding stock. And the idea behind that is that if the babies, leave the mothers, then we'll always be able to get the babies back so long as we can control the mothers. If the mothers get out and for whatever reason they decide to, get off the farm or whatever it is, I have to be able to get them back. That phrase, like, grass is greener on the other side. Well, to a cow, it literally is. So I have to have something sweeter than grass or more enticing than grass to get them back. And then the babes will always come back. So any meat that we produce, we always list it as like grass fed, grass finished if it's ruminant, because it's true. The meat that is designed for human consumption does not touch grain, period. Natural. I mean, unless it's like natural, like in the field. For animals that we feed, which would be pigs and chicken right now, so we have to intentionally give them a ration in addition to whatever they scratch for outside. It's all organic fed and soy free for those that are, again, destined for human consumption. So when we list broilers and chicken meat that we sell, organic fed, non GMO, soy free, which means that it's coming from an organic mill, which is really nice. And we actually had to create a custom mix for that because we identified that if you buy soy free, like a pre-made soy free feed, that doesn't 100% guarantee there's not soy in it, and that's extremely frustrating. So what I mean by that is you have to go into each individual ingredient, especially when you get into like nutrient packs and vitamins that are included in there, and you need to identify, are there any soy binders, is soy involved in it at any step of the way, because I've seen soy free feed that has soy in there. Now we're talking minuscule percentages, but
Hmm.
if I say something, it has to be true. So if I say grass finished, I mean this animal did not eat grain, at least intentionally. If I say this is a soy free chicken, I mean to the absolute 100% best of my knowledge, there is no soy on my farm and there's no soy in this feed mix. So I mean, we go. It's extremely intensive at that point. We use custom feed for broilers, and for pigs, same thing. Like we bring in raw ingredients and we either custom mix them or we one-off mix them based on the time of year, what they need, nutritional profiles, just kind of understanding what they need at that time of year and what's available. Um, with chicken, we actually go a step further with it, which uh, I think is a real benefit. Is we ferment it all. So when you take soy out of the feed for broilers specifically, it's important to recognize that many of the animals that we have access to that are commercially available and used for meat production, unless they're heritage breeds, have been designed at least in some idea with a feed regimen in mind. So soy is a primary ingredient in most broilers' diets. So you can't just take soy out and then say, I'm going to throw in field peas as an example as a substitute. There's a digestibility issue between the two and the way that the animal would process them. Just like for humans, you have a difference between like brown rice and white rice varieties. Same thing for chickens. So what we do is we actually ferment all of the feed that goes into the chickens after the first, I think it's 3 days. We give them dry for the first 3 days and then ferment from that day on. And what we notice is that plus the management style that we have, which is effectively free range within electrified netting. So we don't do confined we don't confine them on pasture either. I mean, they're truly on pasture and they go wherever they want, and they do. It's a huge common misconception that broilers will not act like chicken. It is 100% up to management style. So fermented feed, clean water. Same thing for pigs. That feed gets fermented. Everybody gets fermented feed that eats it. And it's obvious too when you start feeding like side by side, like a dry grain and a wet grain, or a wet feed or a fermented feed, which one the animals have a preference to. It's very obvious very quickly, but it's a lot more work. Hence why people don't want to do it or don't do it. It is more work. I can only attest that from the flavor, the texture, the taste, something is, this process is resulting in different flavored animals and different textured animals, whether it's our, pork, chicken, or beef, that definitely tastes different and it's good. And there's other people out there who do amazing things with this. I think we're all on to something. So, I mean, yeah, that's where we're at with, feeding regimens right now. We've been experimenting with it for over 2 years at this point. We've been working on different feed regimens, and we've finally gotten to a perspective where we can get basically this consumer expectation for chicken while on pasture in a regenerative format with an amazing feed quality.
What do you think? I'm trying to see if I guess my first question would be then, what's the reception been like, particularly with the chicken for your customers?
It's more than what we would say. I mean, it's very good. Like I don't, when people ask us how, what differentiates our chicken, I normally talk about the process. I'll say it, there's a clear taste difference, but I don't normally say it's the best chicken in the world. However, the reviews that we get back, I mean, I wouldn't censor the reviews from our customers. They are very, they're very humbling. They're very good. We are extraordinarily fortunate. The probably the clearest, the best review that went the furthest and got the widest reach was Chef Andrew Gruel's review of our chicken not too long ago. And I didn't, him and I don't know each other. I don't know him personally by any means. I've never spoken to him outside. We've messaged back and forth occasionally, but we didn't. I think I messaged him something. I said, "Hey, when you try this," I don't remember the exact phrase, but it was like, "Just give me feedback. Like, you tell me it's just the same. Like, there's nothing special about. I don't care. That's fine. I just want to know, because a lot of people out here are telling me that this is the best chicken they've ever had, and I believe them. I do, but I also would like a completely disconnected party. And then, when folks aren't familiar with it, it was Chef Andrew Gruel out of California. We sent him some chicken, and he tried it out, and we had minimal, and I mean very minimal conversation between then. Almost like more like, "Hey, I got it."
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Hey, this is good. Okay, cool. And then I had given I spoke at a conference in North Carolina, and all of a sudden, my phone is just like going crazy and buzzing, and I look up, and he posted a video about it, and the comments he left were incredibly generous. But he put a whole video together about it, and a farm that's not too, or a value added producer, Half Pond Homestead, who's not too far from us over the river here. And he did that video about both of us, and he showed the chicken cooking and the comments he made about it. I had no idea he was going to say any of that. I didn't even know he's putting a video. I didn't know what he was going to do. I didn't know if I was ever going to hear from him again. And but some of the language that he used about the chicken, I was like, I could never say that because it would sound so biased, but he did. And we have continued to receive this feedback that seems to go above and beyond what even we're striving for. And I guess we're humbled by that and excited by it. I mean, it's when you're out there and you're working with the animals, and you bring them in, and you're processing them and eating them in your own home with your family, and you look around and you're like, hey, we are, this food tastes different. We feel different. I mean, we're like frying chicken in tallow here, and we don't feel bloated, or, you don't feel sick at all. Like, feel great. Like, how can I eat fried chicken and feel good? And we do. And we've noticed, we definitely notice a difference in it, and we love it. But then you're always like, well, am I clouding my judgment because I'm invested in this chicken? Like, I don't want to say like I just spent 8 weeks of my life feeding this chicken 2 to 3 times a day, moving them on pasture, and then it was like subpar. Like, that
Yeah.
would be, But then, you see comments like what the chef said, and then what neighbors are saying, or folks who are, we don't really know who they are, and they just keep coming. They keep saying, hey, look, we want to buy chicken in bulk, and chicken in bulk, and we want this, we want that. This is the best chicken we've ever had. I mean, we're very truthfully thankful. It gives us a lot of hope that we can make a business out of it, and also that the amount of revenue coming in, or the orders, can surpass what we can do here. Because our ultimate goal is not to become a chicken farm or a meat farm; it's actually become a demonstration farm, so that other people can learn how to homestead and farm here. Which means that as our enterprises grow, we can start to bring other farms in. And we've had a lot of folks reach out to us and say, "Hey, look, can we grow chicken for you?" And ultimately the answer is yeah, that's what we want to do. I mean, you're going to have to, it has to be the exact even strain of chicken that we're using. It has to be the exact protocol, same movement schedule, same structure, same feed routine, because we have to guarantee the quality. And then we have to test it. And we're probably going to go to nutrient testing as well to get some evidence for this chicken as well. So we're going to have to nutrient test it pretty soon. But yeah, I mean, that's the goal, is that, that's what that becomes. And so yeah, the feedback has been unbelievable. I mean, truthfully.
I think that's a good segue into just the whole topic, especially so 9 days is whenever I'm pretty sure 9 days is whenever Trump's in office. And so with that, with the next 4 years and the whole Make America Healthy Again initiative, and then pair that with just on social media, just how much regenerative agriculture and like raw milk just being talked about more and more. Um, People talking about homesteading and all of that jazz. I'm curious how, from your perspective now, with everything you've gone, just all your experiences leading to where you're at now, and how you're saying that you want to help others, start their own thing, whether it be a homestead or an actual farm. How can we drive more folks into this space, especially the younger generations, to where most grow up now with way different aspirations than even me as a millennial, because now a lot of them want to be YouTube or TikTok, and um, most people are indoors. I remember reading a tweet a couple days ago how it was a joke. What was the text of from like his brother-in-law, and the brother-in-law was saying how he just built up this giant fort, had like 100 snowballs ready to throw, had this awesome setup. His kids came out for 5 seconds, then went back in to play Fortnite, and I'm just like, was so sad to read that because you're missing out on so much just being outside as a kid. But that's just so common now overall. And now you think about how disconnected we are from our food. Less than 2% are in agriculture, and that continues to seem like it's dwindling. But that's why it's there's so much to be hopeful for. But then, like when you look at the actual numbers, it's still pretty bad. That's what people don't realize, that we're still not in a great spot from our food system standpoint, especially thinking long term. So I know that was a very long-winded way of how do you think we could really drive folks into this space, whether it is homestead or actual farming?
Yeah, I it's a good question. I'll preface it with this. I had made a post on X the other day as well, and it caught some traction. But you can see what catches traction and with who and why. And my post was echoing kind of the same sentiment, but it was trying to touch on something that I think could be a possibility that would be really bad in the coming future, and that we have to work now to avoid it. Which is basically this idea that the conversation right now is becoming really loud about regenerative agriculture and healthy food and chemicals that are in food. And so it's becoming very obvious. Like, it's harder to deny that there's a broken food system right now, or that the quality of food is just subpar versus harmful. And be careful about the language I use there, but that it's actually not just like bare minimum acceptable. It might not be acceptable, and that we've been eating that, and then we wonder like why there's all these illnesses and sicknesses, and it's not just like debilitating, it's just quality of life and things like that too. And my post was that there might be a time coming where people are going to realize a couple different things, and if the perspective is wrong, it might look like farmers are actually beginning to exploit the dollar from people who are desperate. And the reason I say that is because the way that folks like myself farm, I cannot deny it's more expensive. It costs me, my expenses are so much higher to produce one chicken than many people would even understand. Most people want to buy chicken for a fraction of what it literally costs me to produce it. And so I think that as we get further in this conversation, there's going to be a potential for a divide of who will pay or who can't afford it, which is going to open up a conversation about what's really like what's better, like what's so good about this regenerative agriculture. In that space, there is an opportunity for people to either, not work well together and create sides. There's also an opportunity for people to get jobs, and if the food is priced appropriately, then you can start to offer jobs, especially to local community members. And who those people often would be are going to be young adults looking for wages for jobs that they don't have to have a big degree for or a skill set for. Like, you can just walk on the farm and see that it's beautiful here, and I can put you to work without, immediately. Like, you are useful here. And I think if we can start to frame this conversation around like we want you involved and you have a place here, that's going to fill a void that people are otherwise going to flip. And like there's a potential for like a tribal kind of your side, my side. You're the producer, you have the means, etc. We want them, but you won't give them to us at a price that we can afford. That kind of conversation, I think that's potentially coming. So then, how do we get around that? I think you have to open up the farm to people. Period. I think it has to be accessible. And unfortunately, right now, I couldn't teach someone reliably. I couldn't say, hey, come out here and jump on this combine. Or, hey, you've never driven a manual vehicle in your entire life. So, hey, come out here and jump on this tractor and go move those hay bales over there. And, don't get caught in the ditch, and make sure you, drop the hay bale in the ring for the animals. Like, those things are potentially necessary portions of farming, but they make farming look so hyper specialized that it's inaccessible to people. So what we do is we open up the farm here to tours. So anyone who wants to, we do public tours, we do private tours. We have families out here. We have field trips. We had a local school come out here last year. We do these. Last year we did this thing. It was three days over 3 months. It was like one Saturday, April, May, and June, I think it was. And the whole goal, I can't remember what we called it, Little Farmers Experience or something, and or immersion experience. And the whole point was that parents and young children would come out here, and we would just introduce them to these animals that they've never seen, but not like a petting zoo way. Like, here's an animal, see it, wave at it, pet it. Like, hey, this is a goat. This is what this goat does. This is how this goat behaves. And you could just like see people's eyes lighting up. We had this was amazing. One young girl came over and talked to my wife because we do a round table sometimes in some of these too, and just let people ask us questions. And I remember vaguely this girl said something. She was a young adult. She actually was growing up on like a farm, at like an agriculture environment, and she told my wife something like she was so much more appreciative like of her mom and her family when she left here because she had no idea like how, I don't know, like how much work goes involved or how
Yeah.
beautiful this is. And so I agree with you. This is a very long answer, but thanks for letting me talk about it. But basically, and it's got multiple angles. That's why I talk about like the potential threat coming. I really think if you open up these experiences and intentionally make them not just like, hey, here's something you can see, but here's a thing you can come and do, you will change the perspective entirely and people will want to be involved. Like if you come here for any of our like we do these like immersion experiences, etc., you know, part of that is like we may take you out through the fields and show you like all these plants that we have all planted and these rows of plants that we have annuals out there that are growing and why they're growing. But then we're going to come back to like the yard area and everyone's going to plant tomatoes that you're going to take home with you. So not only did you like see this like farm level, but now you took something home. And when you come back next month, I want to know like you got any pictures of it? Like how's the like did you guys get to eat from it yet? Like how's this going? That I think is how you like you just got you have to be willing to offer the experience. And I think that so many people right now are so they're like in survival mode. Everyone's in a survival mode. Like got to earn this amount to pay this bill, got to do this to do this, got to plant this to eat this. That it's really hard to stop and think, you know what? Like how do we how do we recognize that this might not like we might be finding ourselves in this position in history right now, but if we want to really change it, it's not about us. It's probably about our children and our grandchildren and like those coming generations. So, like, what do we put in motion now for them?
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I want to go on the topic of the cost too, because that's one thing that you hear a lot for a lot of folks, that even switching your whole conventional farm to a regenerative farm is very costly. And you were mentioning just like chicken, for example. So I'd hoping if you could just, give a breakdown of why like doing it regeneratively and the way you're doing it is more costly for yourself.
Yeah. So, the first thing is that the feed is a huge cost. It's a huge cost. When I call the feed mill, they actually remarked that the custom mix that I have to use, which has been collaborated with like a nutrition, like a I won't name the company, but a major company has had to come in and like help us figure out the rations. So we have the appropriate nutrients, et cetera, in our feed. And the feed mill come back and say, look, hey, we're just telling you, this is the most expensive feed that we can pot. Like there is no ration more expensive than this. And that's because we took the soy out. That's all it is. And it's because it has to do with subsidizations and cost of production, and then availability of certain feeds and in what quantities, and then are they organic, are they not organic? Like all of these things add additional regulations and barriers, and frankly, some of the things just aren't really there. One example is like buckwheat. If I understand, one of the most limiting growth factors in animals is methionine. Methionine is lower. You have to find it in very particular like nutrient balances in order to advance the growth of certain animals. Pigs are a great example of this. Buckwheat, if I recall correctly, and maybe I hope I'm correct on this, I have to go back and double check, but has a uniquely high level of methionine. The problem is you don't see a lot of people eating buckwheat pancakes around in the country. So there's not a big market anymore for buckwheat. So in order for us to find someone to grow buckwheat, which would probably be a better like grain for a lot of these animals, it would be an exorbitant cost. So it's not even in our ration. I don't even have it. I grow buckwheat here, but it's not in our ration. So in order to get those rations together and meet all of the things that people really want right now, soy free, organic, even corn free at times, the cost of replacing those ingredients with other ingredients that meet the nutritional needs of these animals is extremely expensive. It just is. I share, I don't share the exact cost with everybody, but if you think of like your common rotisserie chicken, it costs me over 3 times just to produce the chicken, almost 4 times just to produce a chicken. No wages, no labor, no fuel charges. No transportation, nothing, no, not talking about, transportation crates, infrastructure for housing, a dog or two dogs out there to keep the chickens safe. None of those things. Just to produce a single chicken cost me 3 to 4 times more, and I'm a volume buyer. That's the scary part. So I will see it too. If you Google, you'll see people, our pricing strategy was frankly to try to be less expensive than just about anybody else in this space offering soy free or corn free chicken. Ours is only soy free. And the reason that we include corn right now is because we have an organic source of it, but I can also produce it corn free. It's not any really much harder, and we may offer that in the future. But it's it is more expensive just on its like the actual unit cost production. There's no way around it, and it's not going to get less expensive for a long time. The only way for me to make it less expensive, and we intend to do this, is to wholesale more and more and more so I can bring down the costs for other people. We're also moving into like farm share perspectives where, you pay $50, $75, $100 a month and you get X amount more credit over your dollar. So you can buy meats from us or discounted costs. But it's just more expensive. I mean, it truly is. There's no way
Yeah.
around it.
Then, so from marketing perspective, then, because this is another thing that's tough. I mean, it's a whole nother conversation talking about money fiat because that is one of the major reasons as why we're so screwed in a lot of ways is just what's happened with our dollar. Um, so with marketing, for example, with marketing chicken, because like for my business, it's apparel, and so when I think about, I mean, I get constant comments about the cost of my like $40 shirt. That's so stupid. But then it's the same thing with apparel industry as it is for agriculture. We outsourced everything and we chose synthetic petroleum based fibers, and then now we only have 3% of the organic cotton production in America. And so there's nothing here. Like you're saying with buckwheat, there's hardly any organic cotton growing here. And I'm trying to have a whole American made organic brand long term, obviously. I mean, I'm doing what I can right now, but that's how I try to go as marketing, for example, is the fact that A, the actual shirts and quality of the material is super legit. I get comments constantly on how soft they are. But B, I'm trying to paint the full picture as to why my shirts are this price compared to say, because it's always interesting. A lot of people choose these major companies and their price points, like Patagonia or Nike or Harvest and Mill. Like all these companies are very well established, 20 years old, that have captured the market in a lot of ways. So they have just so much power. It's very hard trying to convince a customer to buy a shirt or to make that first step because like you're saying with Chef Gruel saying with your chicken, once they try it, they're like, oh man, this is really good. So that huge hurdle is that first step of the cost. So how do you go about all of this? Because that's going to be huge with like direct to marketing, direct to consumer marketing moving forward. But then most folks, this is why I have this podcast. Most folks don't understand because we've been so disconnected, the price, economics of it all, what goes into it all. Like you're saying with that little girl saying how appreciative she is now, but it's because she just wasn't aware. So I'm just curious, how do you go about all of this?
Well, I think there's a unique conversation around like what this looks like for small scale farm. I'm so passionate about like helping people say, can you make money doing this? I say, absolutely, you can make money doing this. The question is not can you make money doing it, is can you actually sell volume of it to make a living off it or pay someone else a just wage for it? So the way that we've done it thus far is one, it is a relentless commitment to quality. Like there are no shortcuts, period. The second is transparency. If you are a customer, if you want to FaceTime me and you want to, like, if you can't come here and see the chickens in the field, I don't care. I mean, I can't talk to you for an hour, 2 hours, or 3 hours, but you call me and I will FaceTime you or we'll get on something and I'll walk out in the fields and you can see exactly what's going on. This is why I take so many videos and pictures and post them online. And we're beginning to set out an actual like video series from seed to table to show the entire process of how this all looks. The goal there, and I'll tell any small scale farmer, is transparency. Your first win is in quality and trust because there is a trust collapse coming right now in food. There's an absolute collapse of trust coming in food as more of this like make America healthy again and people become aware of all of these different things that are happening and why that country over there is allowed to put that color in their food but or not allowed but we do it here, and All of these things are going to collapse a trust system. So small scale farmers uniquely have an opportunity to communicate that. The third thing is that farmers have to make buying from them convenient, or at least somewhat less friction in the buying process. It is so difficult. There's so many logistic, and I can, anyone who say I can already hear it because I know all the I'm there. It's a logistics issue. It's a freezer space. It's utilities. It's how on earth can I raise 1,000 chickens when I only have X amount of customers? But then if someone picks up the phone and calls me and says, "Hey, I'm looking for some chicken," you have to have some available to sell them, because when they hang up, if you say no, it's not like they're like, "Okay, well, we're not eating meat tonight." Like, they're going
Yep.
somewhere else. So you have to figure out how to work through this. I think farms, in order to like help bridge this and make this possible for people, you have to be really humble in what your pricing looks like, but also not compromise the fact that you have to make a living too. And right now, the dollar is how that is shared commonly. So you have to have a plan from the outset to make X amount of dollars in order to have X amount of profit in your bank at the end of the day, or buried wherever you keep your money. You have to have a plan to do that, and then you have to make it easy for customers to do that with you. I'm a big fan right now of farm shares. Huge fan. Like, I think these are ways of moving forward. A farm share, for those, many people are aware of like a CSA. A CSA is typically around produce. Like, you buy in X amount of dollars for the spring season or the summer season and the fall, and you get something back. A farm share can be a little bit different. It's more like where you're buying into the whole farm. Let's say it's $100 a month. Well, maybe that $100 a month is worth $150 in spending credit, but that $100 a month across X amount of consumers gives that farmer security to buy animals, knowing that some of these animals are going to die. Like, there's a mortality rate, and like, it allows them to buy feed. It allows them to care for all these different things without going into debt or without sacrificing their own financial safety. And that gives the consumer, what I tell people back right now is, look, if you right now, we did this whole thing for pre-orders, sold more chicken in like 3 days than we've sold in an entire season before. What that isn't just profit. Like, people are going to look at our website and look at our pricing and be like, wow, he's making a ton of money off just chicken. I'm not going to share the exact percentage of it. It's not as much as you're thinking. It,
That's same for my apparel. They're like $40. You probably raking in. I'm just like, no, you don't understand at all. Just the margins. It's not
it's not
not
as good
high,
as you're thinking.
not high at all.
It's not. I'm not raising it to not make money either, though. Like, that's the other thing. Like,
Yeah,
I've got a fan. I mean, there's a
well, that's the
daughter,
fine
one of them
balance.
behind
Is
me.
that's the fine balance, and that's why I like you're saying with the transparency, because farmers deserve the. I mean, you should be able to have a profit and live comfortably with your family and actually experience life together. Um, yeah. So
But here's the awkward thing with it too, and it's something that, this is where again, I think some people at some points in life, in some professions, like, are just more like, it's just not as clear as, go to work, get your money, go home, do your thing. Like, right now, farming is in a really unique spot. While I can say all that and say, look, I need to earn a certain amount for my family, and the cost of this chicken is what it is. I also have to ask the question, like, is this just because, like, am I creating a premium product for people who can afford it, or am I creating a meat product that people deserve, or that people like nutritionally, if it's really healthy, then we have to have a conversation. Like, then how do we make it accessible to people? And I mean, it is what it is. If someone has X amount of dollars, then that's what they have. So, locally, we address that on a one-on-one basis with people, and it just is what it is. I don't care if we're losing money in some of those situations. I'm not. If someone tells me, hey, look, we have a family member who has this going on, they have to have, like we are really desperately concerned about this in the food, and when they eat your this that you've got, I mean, they're better. Okay, well, then we're going to handle that. Like, we're just going to make that happen. And I think that for the coming future, farmers are going to have to be really wise, and there needs to be a lot of financial understanding of what's happening, because you're going to be in positions more and more where you have a product that can heal people, or that can support their health. And if we just sit there and we're like, okay, well, there's a cost barrier, like, I I don't think that's going to work.
Yeah.
So I don't have a full answer to what that looks like. I can just say, like, from our perspective, when people, I hope we have enough cash reserves and revenue that if someone comes and says, look, we don't have the money and we need food, that we understand, like, okay, well, we're going to figure that out. And we're creating buying programs right now. Like, one of, well, I can't say exactly what they are, but we're creating buying programs for like certain groups of people based on certain things that are going on in their life,
Hmm.
that they get certain discounts. Like we're made, like, this is affordable, like not public pricing. Like, this is, probably at cost or at loss. Like, we have to make these things work for people. And then over time, more farms come in and we balance this out, because the reality is none of us are going to compete with grocery stores, and we don't want to. And I'm talking major grocery
Yeah.
stores, like, where, okay, colloquially, these are not designed to give farmers a living wage. But imagine if you did take farms and you could get them back in the communities, and local community members could work there, and food supply wasn't disrupted by supply chain issues from places that have nothing to do with you. How much stronger communities would be? It'd be cool. And I
It-
think I think we're closer to that, truthfully, than not.
I think that's a good segue for just like the community aspect. Going back to the gardens that you had in the inner city, I think this could be the last topic to talk about. So for all the folks that do live in the city, what would be your advice? I mean, this could be like the actual technical, like whenever you're the bedding and everything, for someone to start their own little garden. Yeah, how could they do that? What are some of the, I guess, cost expectations and all of that jazz?
Yeah. So, first thing, like, think of what you want to cook, not what you want to plant. Because when you open up a seed catalog, it's so cool. You want to plant everything. Like, those guys are so good at getting me to buy so many varieties of tomatoes. It's insane. And I'm still gonna do it. I mean, have some fun with it too, right? But truthfully, like, if you're saying, like, how can I maximize my investment here in growing, or just how can I grow, things that I want, start with what you want to eat, and look at your meals from the last week. Write down what you liked, and think, okay, well, could I grow this? Could I do this? What could this look like? Some things are going to be harder. It's harder to grow a substantial amount of grain in the city, depending on how much space you have and what your soil quality is. But potatoes, you don't even need to put those in the ground. You can fill up a bag of, some soil or a medium there, and you can grow an enormous amount of potatoes in bags or 5 gallon buckets. This does not need to be expensive at all. You can grow, we are growing, tomatoes. And if you grow tomatoes, consider indeterminate varieties. You'll just keep getting tomatoes until the season ends. You can get them as early as, depending on how early you start them. Maybe you start them indoors and you're already producing tomatoes by April. Well, you're getting tomatoes from April to November for a good indeterminate variety. That's substantial, and it's fun, and it tastes good. There's herbs. I mean, the amount of space needed for herb, you put an herb in a windowsill, whether that's basil or mint or chamomile. I mean, any of these things. My biggest recommendation, and this really comes from my wife, I think, who came up with this idea, is don't start with like what you think you want to grow. Start with what you want to eat, because that will dictate how much fun you actually have in this. Because if you end up just planting a bunch of stuff because you thought it looked cool, eventually, like, the cool factor will wear off when the weeds overtake it, and your garden will just end. And then you'll have that, like, familiar, like, trope of like, that was my garden. I can't garden. I don't have a green thumb, or whatever people say. No, you can. It's just keep the soil moist, keep the weeds, down, and grow things that you actually want to see to fruition, because then you'll care about it a little bit more.
I love that. I didn't even realize. I'm gonna try that with a bucket.
You grow a ton of potatoes in a bucket.
So I guess so. With that, then, how would you go about that? You get a bucket and then,
Drill some holes in it, so that way you don't accidentally, like, make it waterlogged when you water it. So drill some holes in the bottom so it can drain. Fill it up with some soil, and then take your potatoes. You typically, what people would do is what's called chit the potato, CHIT, which is simply where you wait for you, like, put it in a area that's a little bit cooler, little, like, lower humidity, and you'll wait for those eyes to come up. When you get a potato and you're like, hey, can I still eat this? Because it's like sprouting.
yeah,
Okay, so then you cut it so each of those eyes are still there. So you want like an inch, 2 inch piece of the eye left, and then just plant them. and just keep it growing. It creates this beautiful foliage. Many of those potato varieties, like the foliage, and some of them could be edible too. So look that up. But you'll just keep them growing and keep them watered, and after a few months, you'll have an enormous. You'll have it's like 5 to 6 times per every little piece you put in. I mean, it's amazing, and it's calorically dense. So I
Very.
guess that's the other thing to consider. Like if the question too is like, how do I create calories? Well, spinach is not nearly as doesn't have as much like use case as a potato or as sweet potatoes or yams or something else. I'm a big proponent of those too.
Yeah.
But even like you can grow watermelon in a bucket. Easy. You can grow potatoes in a bucket because all you're doing is you're supporting the root structure of growing,
Yeah.
and the vine is going to come out. And you're just, we grew watermelon in the city. We grew corn in the city. Squirrels ate it all, but we grew corn in the city.
That's actually a good point too. I didn't even think about all the critters that you're attracting there too.
It's easier to defend against critters in the country than it is in the city, because in the city they don't have as many options, so they're more aggressive. In the country, they have a lot of options, and you have things you can do. Like I can't just run a dog all day long. I've got to.
Or have a gun and just start shooting.
Yeah, you can't do that. You can't do that. I remember one time we had this raccoons that showed up, and it took some of our chickens, and I was like, oh, that's it. And I trapped it. And I was like, I'm just going to relocate it. So I relocated it to the whole other side. Like I drove it down the other side of the farm. I was like, it'll never come back. And it was back the next day. So yeah, there's some things in the city, how we dispatched of that raccoon is a little different than how you might have to do it in the city.
Yeah, that's actually funny. I guess my final question then, comparing just the city life that you had to now. Um, yeah, I guess what are some things that you liked about the city that you, because we as social media does a great job of thinking of the grass is greener on the other side, especially with where we're at culturally now. And then like the show Yellowstone came out, and I remember hearing friends talk about, oh, we should get some plot of land and go out in the land. And then I've heard so many stories on the flip side of one of my friends, Jordan Hedberg. He's a rancher in Colorado. How he said there were times where folks bought a plot of land and then they got there and realized, what the hell did we just do? They were there for not very long and then they left. Um, so there's a lot of great things, but then we also just have those fantasies in our head. So I'm just curious to hear, what are some things that, now that you're on the land, is there anything that you miss about the city life?
I There's nothing I miss that is like greater in how much I miss it than is worth it. I guess for me in that instance, like I would never want to go back,
Yeah.
truthfully. However, there are things that are clearly different, and they are like very different and very difficult. Community is easily the first one. You know, and when people say that, they'll say, well, I may, stay in touch with people, or we're going to move. We're going to be like 20 minutes away from one another. It's very different when you have animals and you have this entire place that depends on you. You just can't leave in that way, and your responsibilities change. And when I first came here, I was redoing the house, and the closest like big box store, like hardware store, is like 45 minutes away. So I remember going there, and I came back and I realized I forgot something. Well, again, that was an hour and a half drive time alone, not to mention like the 20 minutes I was in the store. So now, if I was going to do this project, now I'm talking 3 4 hours of my day just in travel to get to materials from the closest big box store. Like that's, those things are really hard. So what I would tell people right now, and this is a conversation I'm in a lot because, this is a conversation that's coming up a lot across a lot of communities, and people are interested in moving to land and starting homesteading. Well, there are certain things about the land that it will reveal about you really quickly. Like it doesn't matter if you don't feel well. And people will say, well, obviously it doesn't matter. No, it's hard to explain.
Yeah.
Your animals will die, or they don't understand like, oh, I'm just gonna like skip this meal because Matthew doesn't feel really good, we'll get to it tomorrow. They're coming out, like they're gonna break something, they're gonna do something to eat. Or the weather, historic, we all have an experience with the weather, but in the city, it's really like the conditions of the room you're in, so your house or your office building or wherever you're at, and then you leave that, you go outside to get to the car, and then it's temperature controlled. Out here, the weather really impacts everything in a way that's so humbling. It's almost difficult to articulate clearly. Like rain out here is not just like, oh, let me go inside for a little bit. It's now the rain has caused this, this swale to come up, or this river. There's actually a small, can't think of what you call it, but it's it only happens here in the late springtime when the ground starts to thaw. It's basically where the ground is still frozen, but there's a culvert that runs off water from the early springtime rains. And it actually creates a river that flows all the way through to the back of our property. Well, if you don't know that and you accidentally plant something there or put something there, it's gone. Like it totally washes out. So the weather really changes things, and you're humbled by it. But I think for most people, they simply come to the land with the idea that they're somehow going to like dominate the land, as opposed to it's nearly a different world. And I don't mean that in a condescending way. I just mean
Yeah.
legitimately, like my day would be very different. Like my priorities, the way that I move, like I wouldn't think about food so much if I lived in the city, because it's accessible. Out here, it's not accessible if I don't have it or I don't go pre-planned to have it. So there's all these different things that come up, and I think most people get themselves in trouble because they're watching social media and they're watching these beautiful Instagram videos of, a woman in a flowy dress and hanging up like this
Yeah.
beautiful clothesline. And I'm like, you know what? That's great and all, but like the reality is there's a storm coming, and it's been like overcast for the last 7 days, and
Yeah.
like the clothes are piling up, and there's no like I don't know what. It's not to say it's not beautiful. I want to say objectively, but I don't think that's the appropriate word. But I think for many people, this would be the better lifestyle,
Yep.
but it is not a lifestyle that most people actually are even familiar with. And whatever, almost anything you see on social media, and I post a lot on social media, but I try to do it in a way that's hopefully honest, is it's really clouded people's understanding of what this is.
Absolutely agree. I mean, that's why I always tell people to actually go and visit, and if they allow it, volunteer, because even volunteering for a whole day will make you immensely grateful for the food on your plate. It's wild. Because I mean, like I said, the first day I went and processed chickens, that wasn't even strenuous work, but just seeing that, and then I just start thinking about the whole process because I was only there on its last day, and then it made me start thinking about where the chicken came from, and then seeing the land and seeing the pastures that the chickens roamed, and then eating that, it changed everything. And then just going back to the community piece is so crucial because I mean, suicide rates for farmers is really bad. One of them being for the obvious financial stress of just operating a farm in today's culture. But then another aspect is because the community aspect. You are so siloed out there. Because I mean, people don't realize how big an acre can be too. So you take that, multiply it by 26. That's a lot. But then there's a lot of people that have hundreds of acres that they steward, and so you're out there just in your combine, just cruising around, but you're solo dolo the whole time. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next 4 years because I have so much hope. This is the most optimistic I've ever been for not just our food, but for just our country. Despite, like I was saying, the realities of our food system. So yeah, thank you for joining on this conversation. It's been a pleasure following you along on Twitter too. So that's just been cool.
I'm glad to be here, man. This is I think you're doing some really good stuff, and I'm glad to be here. And I mean, I'm very hopeful as well. I'm very excited. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. We all say hopeful. I think it's going to be a fun few years.
Yes, sir. I guess with that being said, then if there's any last things that you'd like to plug, now would be a good time.
If you want to order chicken from us, we're nationwide shipping, continental US, littlewayhomestead.com/shop. More pre-orders that come in means the more that we can produce. And ultimately, honestly, people come to us from all around the country and they visit us. So we'll post those dates again for 2025 by the end of the month.
Perfect. Thank y'all. Visit www.theregenaissance.co to learn more.